Play this piano. I'll marry you. Billionaire mocked black janitor 10 minutes later. He bought the hall. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. It happened on a bright Saturday morning inside the Grand Arcadia Hotel, a place where glass walls reflected wealth like mirrors of judgment. A charity gala, crowded with champagne laughter and silk dresses, was in full bloom. Every smile was practiced, every compliment rehearsed. At the center of it all stood Vanessa Cole, the billionaire philanthropist in a crimson gown that demanded attention. Behind her, a Steinway grand piano, gleaming under chandelier light. And beside that piano, crouched near the floor with a mop bucket, was Daniel Brooks, the man everyone saw but no one noticed. She caught sight of him and smirked. "Oh, don't stop the show. Tell you what," she said, voice echoing through the marble room. "Play this piano, and I'll marry you." The crowd erupted. Phones came up. Someone whistled. Another shouted, "Come on, janitor, prove yourself." Daniel didn't move. His gray uniform looked too plain for this world of glitter and glass. He sat on the piano bench slowly, eyes calm, unreadable. "You heard the lady," said a guest in a green suit, laughing. "Let's see what he's got." The laughter swelled. That cruel kind of laughter that fills expensive rooms when people mistake privilege for superiority. Vanessa basked in it, posing with her phone like a queen granting mercy. But Daniel only folded his hands. The gold reflections from the chandelier trembled on his face. You could see something shift. Not anger, not fear, but the quiet certainty of a man who'd seen this before. "Music," he said softly, "doesn't start with laughter. It starts with listening." The room stilled for a second. Then the laughter returned, sharper this time. Someone called out, "Guess he's scared." Another chimed in, "Maybe he doesn't even know which keys are which." Vanessa leaned closer, teasing, "Don't be shy, sweetheart. This piano costs more than your salary for a year. Try not to scratch it." That line broke the crowd into applause. He looked at her then, not with resentment, but with the patience of someone who already knew how the story would end. A staff photographer captured the moment, her red dress glowing beside the black piano, his hands resting on his knees, motionless. No one realized they were framing the opening scene of their own humiliation, because in exactly 10 minutes, this quiet man in a janitor's uniform would reveal the truth, and every person in that glittering hall would learn who really owned the floor beneath their feet. Daniel Brooks had been inside that building 1,000 times, but never like this. Today, he came dressed in gray coveralls, the kind that made people look through you instead of at you. The name tag stitched on his chest read, D. Brooks, simple, ordinary, invisible. He moved quietly between crystal tables, picking up stray napkins left by careless guests, listening to laughter that didn't include him. Each sound echoed the same tone he'd heard his whole life, entitlement wrapped in politeness. The Arcadia Hall wasn't just another hotel to him. It was his. 2 years ago, through a private acquisition under his company, Brooks Capital, Daniel had bought the entire property, lobby, ballroom, and the very Steinway grand that Vanessa was now leaning against. He never announced it publicly. He didn't need to. He wanted to see how the place treated the people who couldn't afford to rent it. As he worked, he noticed details others missed. The waiter too scared to correct a guest. The hostess apologizing for someone else's cruelty. This wasn't new. It was a system rehearsed to perfection. Vanessa, radiant and restless, floated from table to table like a celebrity hosting her own reflection. She didn't even glance at the man crouching near her gown when she passed. To her, Daniel was background noise, a shadow moving just outside the spotlight. But the staff knew something was different. The way he carried himself, the calm precision in his gestures. One young lighting technician, Sophia, whispered to her coworker, "That guy's not a janitor. Look how he walks, like he's auditing us." Her friend shrugged it off. "Yeah, right. Rich people don't scrub floors." Daniel glanced up once, catching Sophia's gaze, and for a split second she saw something unsettling, authority behind patience. Then came the announcement from the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our host for the afternoon, Miss Vanessa Cole. Dezive read after added, and dada fall who've the signed of. The crowd applauded wildly. Vanessa smiled, waving as she stepped to the microphone. Thank you all for coming. Today's gala supports arts education, for the less fortunate, of course. That last phrase, the less fortunate, carried a sugar-coated sting. Daniel heard it clearly, his jaw tightening slightly before relaxing again. He'd been called worse. As Vanessa spoke, Daniel moved toward the grand piano, pretending to polish the marble edge of the stage. The camera lights followed her, leaving him half-shadowed. But from where he stood, he could see the reflection of every face in the piano's glossy lid. Laughter, vanity, indifference. She ended her speech with a flourish. And remember, music isn't just sound, it's class. Applause erupted. Glasses clinked. Daniel straightened his posture slowly. The irony nearly made him smile. Sophia whispered again, "Why is the janitor sitting near the piano?" He wasn't cleaning anymore. He was waiting. 10 years ago, Daniel Brooks had been a concert pianist, before walking away from the stage to build an empire that now spanned hotels, recording studios, and investments across 3 continents. But no one in that room knew. They only saw the uniform, not the man inside it. And that was exactly what he wanted. As the music resumed and guests began mingling again, Daniel reached into his pocket and tapped his phone once, sending a single silent message to his assistant waiting in the control room upstairs. Begin observation. Record everything. The stage was set. The crowd didn't know it yet, but this wasn't a charity event anymore. It was a test, one that would reveal just how shallow their version of class truly was. The afternoon shimmered with laughter and crystal light. Music played softly in the background, a live quartet, smooth and harmless. But beneath that polite melody, something sharp began to hum. The air itself was changing. Daniel had finished wiping the marble edge near the piano, but he hadn't moved away. A few guests noticed and whispered among themselves. One man in a navy tux leaned over to his date, smirking. "Guess the help wants a closer look at the expensive toys." The woman giggled, sipping her champagne. The mockery spread in ripples, small, then wider. Every whisper was a spark, and soon the room was flickering with cruelty disguised as humor. Vanessa Cole spotted the commotion and turned, smiling like a performer who'd just found a new prop. "Well," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "since our janitor seems so fascinated by the piano, maybe he wants to give us a performance." Laughter burst out again. Phones rose like a chorus of lenses. Someone shouted, "Yeah, play us a song, Mozart." Daniel didn't reply. He kept his eyes on the polished surface of the Steinway, where her reflection hovered, elegant, confident, and oblivious. "Go on," Vanessa urged. "You know any songs? Or do you just dust the instruments?" The cruelty in her tone sliced through the hall, thin and deliberate. Even the musicians in the corner hesitated, their bows hanging midair. Daniel exhaled slowly, controlled. "Music doesn't come from your hands," he said quietly. "It comes from what's in them." Vanessa blinked, unsure whether he'd insulted her. The guests laughed again just to fill the silence. From the back of the room, Sophia, the young lighting technician, frowned. She opened the event's internal app, scrolling through the staff directory. Then she froze. There it was. Daniel Brooks, consultant, Brooks Capital Holdings. Her eyes widened. "Oh my God," she whispered. "He's on the ownership list." But when she tried to speak, her supervisor hissed, "Stay out of it. This isn't your business." Meanwhile, Vanessa had climbed onto the small stage beside the piano, her red gown trailing like a flame. She placed her phone on a tripod and turned to the audience. "All right, everyone, let's make this fun. If he can play something, anything, I'll donate another $50,000 to charity. How about that?" The crowd cheered. Daniel remained seated, motionless. The lenses zoomed in. "Come on," Vanessa said sweetly. "Don't be shy. Or is this piano too clean for your hands?" That last line landed heavy. Even those laughing felt it. A few glances exchanged, awkward, nervous. But Vanessa basked in the attention, mistaking silence for admiration. Daniel's gaze lifted, calm and unreadable. You think this room belongs to you because you paid for the decorations, he said softly. But you've never heard what real ownership sounds like. For watchers, bada goes. The words didn't shout, they resonated, echoing through the space like the first note of a storm. Vanessa's smile faltered. Excuse me? He looked down at the keys. The reflection of her red gown shimmered across the black lacquer, as if the piano itself was waiting. You asked me to play, Daniel said, his tone steady, almost tender. Just remember, you invited the music. Before he touched a single key, the room held its breath. Somewhere near the bar, a guest whispered, "Who is this guy?" But no one had the answer. Not yet. Because in that moment, under chandeliers and judgment, every sound seemed to lean forward, ready to break. The mockery had done its part. The stage was finally ready for the truth to begin playing back. For a moment, silence hung in the air, that uneasy kind that feels heavier than noise. The crowd waited for Daniel to fail, for their laughter to find another spark. But from the far corner of the hall, someone else was paying closer attention. Sophia, the young lighting technician, still had her phone open. Her thumb hovered over the screen, reading the small digital tag beneath Daniel's name, Daniel Brooks, founder, Brooks Capital, property owner, Arcadia Hall. Her heart skipped. She looked up, then back at the glowing words, unsure if she was seeing correctly. She whispered to her supervisor, "That's him. He owns this place." "Where come?" The man scoffed without looking up from his tablet. "You really think the owner would show up here mopping floors? Don't embarrass yourself, Sophia. Get back to work." But Sophia couldn't shake the feeling. The way he sat, steady, deliberate, unbothered by the stares, didn't look like someone out of place. It looked like someone measuring the room. On stage, Vanessa was still performing for her audience. "What's wrong?" she teased. "Cat got your talent?" The crowd laughed again, though the laughter was thinner now, stretched by unease. A few guests had started checking their phones, too, their curiosity outpacing their amusement. That was when Sophia made her move. She slipped toward the sound booth, whispered something to the AV operator, and pointed toward the giant screen behind the stage, the one used for donor acknowledgments. "Just trust me," she said. "Pull up the ownership slide. The master list. They daub, and then daub." The operator hesitated. "You're sure?" 100%. Meanwhile, Daniel sat perfectly still. The laughter no longer touched him. He stared at the piano lid, where he could see the reflection of a crowd that had already convicted him for being ordinary. Then, quietly, from the speakers above, a soft electronic chime sounded. A transition cue. The large LED screen behind Vanessa flickered once. She turned, startled. The words glowed in gold lettering. Property ownership. Arcadia Hall. Brooks Capital Holdings. Founder, Daniel Brooks. The entire hall froze. For 3 long seconds, you could hear the air conditioning hum. Then came a wave of murmurs. "Wait, is that him? It can't be. Brooks Capital? That's $1 billion firm." Vanessa laughed nervously, thinking it was a glitch. "Okay, that's cute," she said, waving a hand. "Who's playing jokes in my event?" But Sophia didn't back down. She stepped out from the booth, her voice trembling but clear. "It's not a joke, Miss Cole. That's his name. He's the owner." The statement sliced through the tension like a violin string snapping mid-note. Heads turned. The phones that had been recording mockery were now filming disbelief. Vanessa blinked rapidly, her confidence slipping. "You must be mistaken. He's a janitor." Daniel finally stood, straightening his back. He looked taller now, or maybe the room had shrunk. "Sometimes," he said calmly, "you learn more about people when you let them believe what they want to see." A ripple went through the crowd, a collective intake of breath. Vanessa's voice wavered. "You mean to tell me you're—" But before she could finish, the manager of the venue approached, phone in hand, face pale. He whispered something in her ear. Her lips parted. No words came out. The laughter that once filled the hall had turned to silence. Even the quartet in the corner had stopped mid-song, their bows suspended in air. Daniel looked around the room, at all the expensive fabrics and nervous eyes, then at Sophia, the only one brave enough to speak truth aloud. He gave her a small nod. The crowd still didn't know what would happen next. But deep down, They could feel it. The shift, the hierarchy they trusted was starting to crack, and the man they'd laughed at was about to take back the stage that had always been his. Vanessa Cole stood frozen beside the grand piano, her reflection trembling in the glossy black lid. Around her, the laughter that once fed her ego had vanished into a thick, uneasy quiet. Phones were still raised, but now every lens trembled, unsure whether to keep recording. Daniel Brooks hadn't moved yet. His stillness was its own storm, calm enough to make people afraid of what would come next. Then Vanessa forced a brittle laugh, her voice echoing off the marble walls. All right, this is getting ridiculous. Someone's clearly having fun with the event screens. Security, please escort this man out. Two guards in dark suits stepped forward, unsure but obedient. One reached for Daniel's shoulder. The moment his hand touched the fabric of Daniel's uniform, the tension snapped like a wire pulled too tight. Gasps erupted across the hall. The sound of contact, small but sharp, cut through the silence. Daniel turned his head slowly, his expression unreadable. "You really want to do this?" he asked quietly. The guard hesitated, hand still half raised. He'd seen that look before, not anger, but authority, the kind that doesn't ask twice. Vanessa folded her arms, pretending confidence. "Don't just stand there. Do your job." Daniel's eyes flickered, and for a brief second, something old flashed behind them. A memory burned deep. He was 12 again, standing outside a music academy in Atlanta, hands trembling from cold. He'd saved for weeks to rent a piano for an audition, but when he arrived, the instructor looked him up and down and said, "Sorry, kid, we don't rent to your kind. The instruments here are for students of refinement." That phrase had stayed with him, slicing its way through every accomplishment since. Refinement, a word used like a fence. He blinked, returning to the present. The same kind of people stood before him now, different clothes, same blindness. The guard stepped back, uncertain. Vanessa noticed and hissed, "Fine, I'll handle this myself." She snatched her phone off the piano, turned the camera on him again and sneered, "You wanted attention? Let's give the internet a good laugh. Janitor claims to own a hotel. Has a nice ring to it, doesn't it?" The flash went off, harsh, white, humiliating. Guests flinched. Daniel didn't move. His voice was steady, quiet, but every syllable carried weight. "You think power means being seen, but power is what happens when you stop asking for permission." He reached down, opened the piano lid fully, and pressed one key. Just one. The note rang through the room, pure, haunting, absolute. That sound, a single tone in a hall of marble and glass, was louder than any argument. The crowd stopped breathing. "I told you to stop," Vanessa snapped, voice cracking now. "This is my event." Daniel looked up, meeting her eyes. "No," he said softly. "This is my building." Gasps spread like a ripple through water. Vanessa's grip on her phone loosened. "You're lying." From the back, Sophia's voice rose again, steady this time. "He's not lying. I checked the registry myself. He owns the Arcadia." The guards froze. The guests looked from one to another, unsure which world they were standing in now, the one they'd believed or the one unfolding before them. Vanessa's face hardened, but her voice faltered. "Even if you are, you shouldn't be dressed like." "Like what?" Daniel interrupted. "Like someone beneath you?" He took a slow step toward her. Every eye followed. The chandeliers above flickered as if the room itself were holding its breath. "You humiliated a man for doing honest work," he continued. "You used charity as theater, and you called it class." 2-1. No one spoke. No one moved. He turned toward the piano again, fingertips grazing the keys. "You said if I played, you'd marry me," he said softly. "Maybe you should have asked what kind of man you were laughing at before you made the offer." The words landed like a verdict. Vanessa's phone slipped from her hand and hit the floor with a dull thud. The camera kept recording, tilted upward, capturing the moment the mask of privilege finally cracked. And in the reflection of the black piano lid, her own face stared back at her, smaller, hollow, and for the first time, afraid. The fall of Vanessa's phone echoed through the grand hall, a hollow, metallic sound that felt like the closing of a door. The guests froze. The piano sat between them now like a courtroom bench, the air vibrating with a tension that no one dared to cut. Daniel straightened his back, the quiet authority in his movement enough to make the guards step aside without a word. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every person in that marble hall could feel that the balance of power had shifted, invisibly but completely. He reached into his pocket and took out a slim black phone, the kind of model used by executives who didn't like to be tracked. He pressed a single button. "Rachel," he said calmly, his tone steady as stone. "Activate internal protocol. Confirm Arcadia ownership verification on screen. Make it public." A pause, then a crisp female voice replied through the phone's speaker. "Yes, Mr. Brooks. Authorization code confirmed. You're live." Vanessa blinked, her lips parting. "Wait, you're streaming this?" Before anyone could answer, every large screen in the hall flickered. The golden logo of Brooks Capital Holdings appeared, followed by a message, "Ownership verification. Arcadia Hall, 100% acquired by Brooks Capital, the 4th of March 2024. The logo faded, replaced by a real-time camera feed of the event itself. Vanessa standing before the piano, her red gown like spilled wine, and Daniel beside her, calm and composed. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few guests instinctively lowered their phones, realizing the story was now being recorded by the building itself. Vanessa stumbled a step back, voice trembling. "You can't do this. You're humiliating me in front of it." "No," Daniel cut in softly. "You did that all on your own." He gestured toward the piano bench. "You asked me to play. Maybe it's time you listened." Without waiting for her response, he sat. The lights dimmed automatically, as if the hall itself recognized its true master. Then he played. Not a showy melody, not a crowd pleaser. Something raw, deliberate, filled with restraint. Each note was a sentence, each pause an accusation. The music didn't ask for applause, it demanded reflection. The audience stood motionless, trapped between shame and awe. As his hands moved across the keys, the screens behind him shifted again, showing silent clips, his foundation funding music programs for underprivileged kids, rebuilding schools in cities that had forgotten their art. The irony struck deep. The man mocked as a janitor had built more futures than the entire room combined. When the last note faded, no one dared to breathe. He stood and turned toward the crowd. "For years," he said quietly, "I watched rooms like this pretend that generosity was kindness, when really, it was vanity with better lighting." The words cut through the air like a cello string under pressure. "You wanted a show?" he continued. "You got one. And now, Miss Cole," his gaze fixed on her, "you'll finish it properly." Vanessa's voice cracked. "What do you mean?" "Announce your donation, the one you promised when you mocked me. 50,000 to arts education, wasn't it? The cameras are still rolling." A murmur spread. She froze, then tried to smile. "That was just a joke?" he interrupted. "Good. Then this is your punchline." Behind him, the main screen displayed her earlier words from the microphone recording. "If he can play that piano, I'll donate 50,000 to charity." The crowd turned toward her, waiting. Vanessa's face flushed crimson. She nodded weakly. "Fine. Yes. I'll pay it." "Not to me," Daniel said. "To the foundation under your name, and I'll match it personally." He turned back to the audience, voice calm, commanding. "Let this moment be a reminder. Wealth doesn't excuse cruelty. It exposes it." Then, to the astonishment of everyone, he bowed slightly. Not to Vanessa, but to the janitorial staff standing near the exit, the ones who had watched in silence. "Thank you," he said to them, "for doing work most people ignore." The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was raw, the kind that comes from people who just saw justice unfold in real time. And as Vanessa stood trembling in the dim light, Daniel Brooks, the man they'd mocked, had just rewritten the definition of class without ever raising his voice. The applause still echoed through the grand hall when Vanessa Cole finally found her voice again, brittle, broken, desperate to reassemble her dignity. "All right," she said, forcing a laugh. "You've made your point. Very dramatic. I suppose this was all some elaborate lesson, wasn't it?" Daniel looked at her, expression calm but eyes sharp enough to slice through pretense. "No," he said softly. "This wasn't a lesson. This was accountability." Whether what or depideted. He stepped closer to the microphone, the one she had used to humiliate him minutes ago. The room fell into silence so complete it felt sacred. You called me a janitor, he said, voice low and steady. In a building I built. You mocked my hands for cleaning floors that you're only allowed to walk on because of me. A murmur rippled across the guests, disbelief mixed with awe. You laughed at me for touching a piano, Daniel continued, his tone tightening, in a hall I commissioned, in a company I own. He let the words hang, heavy as thunderclouds. Then, without theatrics, he said the line that would explode across social media before the night was over. You called me a fraud in the company I own. The room stopped breathing. Someone gasped. A champagne glass cracked under nervous fingers. Daniel didn't look at Vanessa, not anymore. He looked at the crowd. You all saw it, he said, and I want you to remember how easily it happened. How quickly a room can decide someone's worth based on their uniform, their skin, or their silence. He turned slightly toward Sophia, the young technician who had exposed the truth. And I also want you to remember that one voice of honesty can change the entire tone of a room. The audience turned to her, applauding softly. Sophia's eyes glistened, her hands trembling, but she nodded, not out of pride, but relief. Vanessa took a step forward, her mask cracking. I didn't know who you were, she said, her voice almost pleading. If you had, Daniel interrupted, you would have smiled. You would have pretended kindness. You would have shaken my hand and called me inspiring. But that's the point, Miss Cole. You only give respect when you think it's safe. This Glapter, he turned his gaze toward the cameras still recording. To everyone watching, he said, let me make something clear. I don't care about apologies. I care about awareness. Because the next Daniel Brooks you laugh at might not own the building. He might just be someone trying to make it through the day. The room was motionless, breathless. Even the chandelier lights seemed dimmer now, as if ashamed of the glow they'd lent to arrogance. Then Daniel glanced at the event manager, who stood pale and trembling near the back. End the live stream, Daniel said quietly. This isn't entertainment anymore. But the cameras didn't stop rolling. Viewers online were already typing furiously. Number Brooks revealed. Number play this piano. Number justice in silence. Vanessa's shoulders slumped. The crowd parted instinctively as Daniel walked past her. Slow, deliberate steps that echoed across the marble floor. Mr. Brooks, she called out, her voice breaking. What happens now? He paused at the base of the stage, then looked back at her. Not cruel, just certain. Now? He said. Now you see what humility looks like. He raised his phone again. Rachel, he said. Suspend Arcadia's event contracts effective immediately. Full audit on management behavior. And Miss Sophia Morales, promote her to event director. She's the only person here who remembered integrity. Thank you for watching. The audience broke into another stunned wave of applause. Some guests even cheered softly. Vanessa's face drained of color. Her empire of image had just crumbled in public view. Daniel turned back toward the piano one last time, resting his hand on its polished edge. You thought this was just an instrument, he said quietly. But it's a mirror. It plays back whatever you give it, noise or grace. He pressed a single note, pure, cold, and final. And as it faded, every person in that room knew they had just witnessed a symphony that had nothing to do with music and everything to do with truth. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound in the room was the lingering echo of that final piano note, hovering in the air like judgment that refused to fade. Then the silence broke. Not with applause this time, but with the quiet panic of people realizing they had just been part of something unforgettable and unforgivable. The event manager hurried down the aisle, face pale, phone pressed to his ear. Yes, Mr. Brooks understood. We'll suspend all events immediately, he whispered. His voice trembled as he added, Yes, sir, refunds will be processed tonight. The guests shifted uncomfortably, clutching their glasses, unsure whether to leave or wait for permission. A few of them tried to approach Daniel, but the weight in his posture told them not to. Vanessa Cole stood alone on the stage, her reflection fractured across the glossy piano lid. The red of her gown had lost its luster under the sterile light. She looked smaller now, not because she had shrunk, but because the illusion of power had. Daniel, please, she said softly. Can we talk privately? I didn't mean to, Soda. He turned to her slowly. You meant every word, he said. Not cruelly, just factually. You only regret that people saw it. Her eyes watered. You're destroying my reputation. No, Daniel replied. You destroyed your own reputation the moment you decided someone's worth was beneath your amusement. The two security guards who had tried to remove him earlier now stood at attention near the door, uncertain whether to stay or leave. Daniel glanced their way. Gentlemen, he said, take a break. You did what you were told. Now you can do what's right. They nodded silently and stepped aside. Vanessa turned toward the audience, trying to salvage control. Everyone, this has gone far enough. We all make mistakes. Surely we can move past. But the guests weren't listening. One woman in the front row spoke up, her voice shaking but firm. No, we can't just move past it. You embarrassed a man because of how he looked. That's not a mistake. That's a mindset. Others nodded, murmuring agreement. Phones were still recording, their cameras capturing a slow, cinematic unraveling of arrogance. Daniel looked around the hall, his expression softened but steady. This isn't about punishment, he said. It's about exposure. If you want to change a culture, you have to turn the lights on, even if what you see is ugly. He pulled out his phone again. Rachel, lock Arcadia's staff accounts. Begin restructuring under compliance supervision. Anyone involved in discriminatory conduct is to be terminated. Vanessa flinched. You can't fire people in front of a crowd! Watch me, Daniel said. On the main screen, a series of notifications appeared. ACCESS revoked. User account disabled. Contract voided. The crowd gasped. It was happening live. The event staff, the ones who'd laughed earlier, stood frozen as their keycards blinked red in their pockets. The irony was devastating. The same color as Vanessa's dress. A soft clap began from somewhere near the back, hesitant, then stronger. More guests joined, then more, until the hall erupted in applause. It wasn't applause for spectacle. It was relief, catharsis, the sound of fairness finally showing its face. Daniel raised a hand gently, quieting them. Justice isn't about revenge, he said. It's about remembering that silence is a choice. You either speak up for dignity, or you become part of the insult. It does this. His words landed with the gravity of a verdict. Vanessa looked down, her hands trembling. I just wanted people to like me, she whispered. They did, Daniel replied. Until they saw who you really were when no one powerful was watching. A wave of camera flashes went off. Reporters, influencers, live streamers. Vanessa turned away, covering her face. Daniel walked toward the piano once more, running his fingers along its smooth edge. I don't enjoy public humiliation, he said quietly, but sometimes the truth needs witnesses. He looked toward Sophia, the young technician who had started it all. Sophia, he said, shut down the lights. She hesitated. All of them? All of them, he confirmed. The chandeliers dimmed one by one until only the piano remained illuminated, a single spotlight cutting through the darkness. Daniel stood beside it, calm, centered. This, he said softly, is what change looks like. Not loud, just clear. 8, 8. And as the light faded to black, the audience broke into one last, haunting round of applause. The kind that comes when everyone knows they've just witnessed history, not performance. When the lights rose again, the air inside Arcadia Hall was different, thinner, clearer, almost reverent. The laughter, the arrogance, the restless energy of luxury had vanished, leaving behind a silence that felt like confession. Daniel Brooks stood at the center of the room beside the grand piano, no longer a man mistaken for a janitor, but the calm gravity everything revolved around. The guests hadn't left. No one wanted to. They were still processing what they had seen. The inversion of power, the quiet dismantling of vanity. He looked across the room, at the faces that now carried a shadow of guilt, then at the staff who had once mocked him. He wasn't angry. He was resolved. People think justice is about noise, Daniel said softly, about shouting louder than the ones who wronged you. But justice doesn't need volume. It needs truth. Every eye stayed locked on him. I didn't raise my voice today, he continued, Because I didn't have to. I raised the standard. A low murmur spread, a collective exhale of awe and discomfort. Vanessa Cole stood near the side wall, mascara streaking down her cheek, her red dress wrinkled and dull. She looked less like a billionaire and more like a mirror no one wanted to face. Daniel turned toward her, his tone steady but without malice. I don't hate you, Miss Cole. Hate is cheap. I just hope one day you'll understand the difference between being admired and being respected. One fades when the applause stops. The other stays, even in silence. Vanessa swallowed hard. What do I do now? He held her gaze. Start with listening. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then she nodded. A small, almost invisible gesture of surrender. Daniel turned back to the audience. For everyone watching here and online, remember this moment. The janitor you laughed at might be the person signing your checks, but that's not the real lesson. The real lesson is, why did you have to know he was rich before you decided to treat him with dignity? That question landed heavy, sinking into every corner of the room. People shifted uncomfortably, some lowering their cameras, others wiping silent tears. The truth is, Daniel said, his voice deep and calm, we shouldn't need revelation to show respect. We should need only humanity. He reached down, closed the piano lid, and placed one hand gently on the polished surface. I built this place, he said, not to host performances, but to create spaces where people could feel something real. Maybe tonight, for the first time, it finally served its purpose. Juan's fair. Sophia, standing near the lighting booth, felt her throat tighten. She'd never heard leadership sound like that. Not loud, not proud, just certain. Daniel looked up at her and gave a faint smile. Sophia, keep your courage. People will forget what was said, but they'll remember who stood for what was right. She nodded, eyes glistening. Then Daniel turned toward the double doors. The crowd instinctively stepped aside as he walked past them, not out of fear, but out of respect. At the threshold, he paused and looked back one last time. You all came here for music, he said. What you got instead was truth. And truth, like music, only resonates when you stop talking long enough to hear it. He stepped through the doors and disappeared into the corridor, leaving behind a room full of stunned guests and the faint echo of his final words. Outside, the night was cool and silent. The city lights reflected off the glass facade of Arcadia Hall like tiny spotlights bowing toward him. He loosened his tie, finally at ease, finally himself. Behind him, a small sign above the entrance flickered to life, a quote he'd chosen years ago when he bought the building but never revealed until now. It glowed in soft gold letters. Respect is not a performance, it's a habit. And beneath it, in smaller text, D. Brooks. Inside the hall, applause rose once more. Not forced, not frantic, but sincere. It was the sound of realization. The sound of a world for one brief evening, learning the rhythm of humility.